Ava Gardner left Frank Sinatra standing in the rain, and he never recovered. Madrid, November 12, 1957, 3:17 a.m. The most powerful man in Hollywood is standing in the rain. Not at a premiere where flashbulbs explode like stars and reporters shout his name like a prayer. Not on a red carpet where his footsteps are immortalized in cement. Not in front of screaming fans who would tear the clothes from his back just to have a piece of him, just to say they touched Frank Sinatra, outside a hotel room door. Room 307, Hotel Castellana Hilton, 5th floor. End of a dimly lit hallway that smells like expensive cigars and French perfume and secrets that cost a fortune to keep. Frank Sinatra, the man who made presidents wait while he finished his bourbon, who told off Louis B. Mayer to his face and walked away with a better contract, who walked out of any room he wanted because he knew they'd beg him to come back, who had Marilyn Monroe's private number and Ava's sister's home number and the direct line to the Oval Office, is begging. His knuckles are raw from knocking. 3 solid hours of knocking on wood that won't open. The skin on his right hand, the hand that holds microphones and signs autographs and once wore a wedding ring that belonged to this woman, is torn open and bleeding onto his custom-made shirt. His voice is hoarse from whispering her name through the crack under the door. That voice, the voice that sold 150 million records worldwide, the voice that made grown women faint in theater aisles from New York to Los Angeles, the voice that senators and mobsters paid fortunes just to hear sing one song in their private clubs. That voice is now reduced to a broken, pathetic whisper that no one will ever hear on a record. Ava, baby, please just talk to me for 5 minutes. I know you're awake. I can see your shadow moving under the door. I can hear you breathing on the other side. Baby, please. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Just 5 minutes of your time. Inside that room, Ava Gardner, the most beautiful woman in the world. They called her in every magazine from Life to Look to Paris Match. More beautiful than Rita Hayworth, who defined sex appeal. More dangerous than Lauren Bacall, who defined mystery. More untamable than Katharine Hepburn, who defined independence. The woman who made Howard Hughes billionaire, aviator, madman propose marriage 3 times. The woman who made Ernest Hemingway write her Into the Sun Also Rises without permission. The woman who broke every man who ever loved her and never apologized for it. She's sitting on her bed right now, fully dressed even at 3 a.m., smoking her 4th cigarette in the last hour, tears running down her face that she keeps wiping away with the back of her hand, leaving mascara streaks across her cheeks like war paint. She can hear him, every word, every sob, every desperate pathetic plea that tears her heart open. The concierge downstairs, Alfonso Mendez, can hear him. He's called the manager twice. The manager is standing at the end of the hallway, now in his bathrobe, watching this scene unfold, not sure what to do when Frank Sinatra has a complete nervous breakdown in your hotel. Do you call the police? Do you call the American embassy? Do you just let it happen? The elderly couple in room 306, Harold and Ethel Peterson from Minneapolis, married 42 years, here celebrating their anniversary, can hear him. They're pressed against their door with their ears to the wood, listening to the most famous voice in America beg for mercy from a woman who won't give it. The newlyweds in room 308, names unknown, Spanish couple, just married yesterday, can hear him. They've stopped their honeymoon activities. They're sitting on their bed in complete silence, holding hands, listening to a man's heart shatter in real time just 2 doors away. Tomorrow morning, this will be in every newspaper in Europe. By tomorrow afternoon, it will be in America. By tomorrow night, the whole world will know. Sinatra's Madrid meltdown. Only Blue Eyes cries for Ava, the night Frank lost his mind in Spain. The photos will run for weeks. Gossip columnists like Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons will feast on this story for months. But tonight, right now, this exact moment at 3:17 a.m. on November 12, 1957, she doesn't open the door. She sits on the other side, 6 inches of wood between them. So close she can smell his cologne through the crack. Yardley's English lavender, the one she bought him for Christmas 2 years ago, the one he still wears because it reminds him of her. She sits there in her black silk robe, and she listens to him beg, and she doesn't open the door. And that night, those 6 hours and 42 minutes in a Madrid hotel hallway in cold November rain, explains everything you need to know about the man Frank Sinatra became after Ava Gardner. The rage that would explode without warning over the smallest things. A waiter bringing the wrong drink, someone pronouncing his name wrong, a photographer getting too close. The drinking that started at noon with bourbon and didn't stop until he passed out at 4 a.m. surrounded by empty bottles and yes men who were too afraid to leave. The violence against photographers, against reporters, against anyone who asked the wrong question or looked at him the wrong way or mentioned her name in his presence. The way he'd destroy entire dressing rooms, $15,000 worth of damage, mirrors shattered, furniture thrown through walls, if someone simply said Ava within his hearing. The way he'd fire loyal employees of 20 years for minor infractions because he needed someone to hurt the way he was hurting. The way he'd cry during One for My Baby and One More for the Road, even 20 years later, even when he was married to someone else, even when he was supposed to be over her, over this, over all of it. Because before Ava Gardner, Frank Sinatra had never lost. Not once. Not ever. Not at anything that mattered to him. He'd won at everything. Every audition, every contract negotiation, every woman he'd ever wanted, every battle he'd ever fought. And after Ava Gardner, he never stopped losing her. Every single day for the rest of his life, for 41 years until the day he died in 1998, he lost her again. Every morning he woke up and she wasn't there. Every night he went to sleep alone. Every time he sang a love song on stage to thousands of screaming fans, he was singing to an empty chair where she should have been sitting. Let's go back. Let's go back to 1945, when Frank Sinatra was God walking on earth. December 9th, Times Square, New York City. Frank Sinatra's name blazing in lights. Frank Sinatra was the biggest star in America. Not the biggest singer, not the biggest actor, not the biggest entertainer, the biggest star, period, full stop. Bigger than Clark Gable, who'd won an Oscar, bigger than Humphrey Bogart, who defined masculinity, bigger than Cary Grant, who defined sophistication, bigger than anyone who'd come before him, and bigger than anyone who would come after him for another 20 years until a kid named Elvis Presley showed up. When he performed at the Paramount Theatre in October 1945, 1,000 teenage girls rioted outside. This isn't press agent exaggeration. This isn't Hollywood mythology. This is documented historical fact with police reports and hospital records and insurance claims to prove it. They broke through wooden police barricades that splintered like toothpicks under their combined weight. They tore the velvet seats out of the theatre, actually ripped them from their bolts in the floor as souvenirs. They fainted in the aisles by the dozens and had to be carried out by ushers who were themselves on the verge of fainting from the chaos. The New York Police Department had to call in reinforcements from 3 different precincts just to maintain some semblance of order. One girl, Betty Laredo, 16 years old from Queens, daughter of a plumber, jumped from the balcony trying to reach the stage, fell 20 feet, broke her ankle in 2 places, and fractured her wrist. Smiled through the tears and the pain. The whole ambulance ride to the hospital because she'd gotten within 20 feet of Frank Sinatra. 20 feet. That was close enough for her to die happy. Frank was making $1 million a year in 1945. He had his own weekly radio show on CBS, Songs by Sinatra, Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, 40 million listeners tuning in like it was church. He had his own movie contract with MGM, 7 pictures guaranteed, $100,000 per picture plus a percentage of profits with script approval and director approval and final cut. He was 30 years old, and he owned the world, and he had Nancy Barbato from Hoboken, New Jersey. The girl who lived 3 blocks away from his parents' house. The girl who became his girlfriend when they were both teenagers with nothing but dreams. The girl who became his wife when he was nobody. The mother of his 3 children. The woman who knew every secret, every fear, every insecurity, every dream he'd ever had since he was a kid. They'd met in 1934 when Frank was 19 years old, skinny as a rail, 135 pounds soaking wet, big ears, prominent Adam's apple, singing for tips at the Rustic Cabin, a roadhouse in Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey, across the river from Manhattan. Frank would sing standards for 4 hours straight, Gershwin, Porter, Berlin, whatever the drunk customers requested, and at the end of the night he'd walk around with a fishbowl collecting dollar bills and quarters. Good night was $15, bad night was $3 and some change. Nancy would come in every Friday night without fail, sit at the bar, order 1 Coca-Cola, nurse it for 4 hours, just so she had an excuse to stay and watch him sing. She believed in him when he was nobody, when he was just another skinny Italian kid from Hoboken with big dreams and no prospects, and a voice that some people loved and other people said was too thin, too nasal, too different. She married him in 1939, when he was making $25 a week singing on the radio, and they lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with a bathroom they shared with 3 other couples down the hall. She ironed his 1 good shirt before every audition. She told him he was better than Bing Crosby, the undisputed king of popular music, when the whole world was laughing at him for even thinking it. By 1945, they had 3 children, Nancy Jr., born June 1940, Frank Jr., born January 1944, and Tina would arrive in 1948. They lived in a beautiful house in Toluca Lake, California, white picket fence, manicured lawn, swimming pool in the backyard, barbecues every Sunday afternoon, where Nancy's Italian mother would bring her homemade lasagna, and Frank's Sicilian mother would bring her marinara sauce, and they'd have unspoken competitions over whose was better, while everyone pretended not to notice. The children would run around the yard screaming and playing. Frank would smoke Cuban cigars with Nancy's father and pretend to care about the Brooklyn Dodgers. Nancy would serve homemade lemonade in a glass pitcher and make sure everyone was happy and comfortable. Nancy didn't drink, maybe 1 small glass of wine at Christmas midnight mass. She didn't smoke. She didn't curse. She went to confession every Saturday morning at 8 a.m. sharp, and Mass every Sunday at 10 a.m., and she prayed the rosary every single night before bed on her knees. She wore dresses that went past her knees. She never showed cleavage in public. She smiled warmly at Frank's fans, even the crazy ones who camped outside their house, and she'd sign autographs as Mrs. Frank Sinatra in her perfect Catholic school penmanship. Nancy was safe. Nancy was home, and Sunday dinners, and PTA meetings, and children's birthday parties with vanilla cake. Nancy was everything a good Italian Catholic boy from Hoboken was supposed to want, and Frank Sinatra was about to meet the woman who would teach him that safe was a cage. That home was a prison with nice curtains. That love wasn't really love at all if it didn't burn you alive from the inside out. October 17th, 1946, MGM Studios, Culver City, California. Soundstage 5. MGM threw a party for the premiere of The Killers, the Hemingway adaptation, dark and violent, and nothing like the usual glossy Hollywood fare. Black tie mandatory, studio executives in custom tuxedos, actresses in gowns by Adrian and Edith Head, champagne fountains, caviar from Russia, lobster tails flown in from Maine that very morning, a 40-piece orchestra playing Cole Porter under lights that cost $10,000 to install. Frank was there because he was MGM property. Louis B. Mayer owned him like he owned the cameras and the lights and the sound stages. Frank was holding court by the bar as always, surrounded by yes-men and executives and starlets who laughed at everything he said even when it wasn't remotely funny. He was in the middle of telling some story about Dean Martin when the room stopped. You know that moment when someone walks into a room and everything changes. The air pressure shifts. Conversations die mid-sentence. Every head turns. Ava Gardner walked in. She was 24 years old, 5'6", 118 pounds, dark hair falling to her shoulders, green eyes that a photographer once described as emeralds drowning in whiskey. She wore an emerald green dress, strapless, backless, a dress that cost $800 that she'd charged directly to MGM and dared them to complain. But it wasn't the dress, it was how she moved. She didn't glide like other actresses. She walked like she was going somewhere important, and you were in her way. She walked straight to the bar, past Louis B. Mayer, past executives, past directors, past Rock Hudson, and ordered whiskey. Not champagne, not wine, whiskey, Jack Daniels, double, no ice. The bartender hesitated. Ladies didn't order whiskey in 1946. Ava raised one eyebrow, waited. He poured. She drank half in one swallow, lit a cigarette without asking anyone's permission. Frank watched from 30 feet away, and something inside him woke up. She wasn't like other actresses. She didn't giggle, or flirt, or perform. She drank whiskey with crew guys. She cursed like a sailor. She'd said fuck in front of Louis B. Mayer, and when he gasped, she said it again. She'd grown up barefoot in North Carolina, Grabtown, population 500, youngest of 7. Her father died when she was 15. They lived in a house with holes in the roof. She picked tobacco for 50 cents a day. She'd been married twice already. Mickey Rooney, he cheated. Artie Shaw, he lectured her about Kierkegaard. By 1946, Ava had decided, no man will ever own me again. Frank walked over, used his best line, that smile, I'm Frank Sinatra, can I buy you a drink? Ava looked him up and down, took a drag, blew smoke in his face. I know who you are, and I don't like skinny Italians who think they're God's gift. She turned her back, walked away. No woman had ever said no to Frank Sinatra. In that moment, Frank became obsessed. He sent flowers. She returned them. He called. She hung up. He showed up at her house. She called the police. For 2 years, Ava refused him, because she understood. Men like Frank only want what they can't have. But in 1949, Ava's marriage to Artie Shaw collapsed. She was lonely, drinking. When Frank called, she said yes. Their first date, March 18th, 1949. Frank picked her up at 8 p.m. in his new Cadillac. She wore pants, no dress, no bra under her silk blouse. Where are we going? Palm Springs. That's 3 hours. I know. She smiled. Then drive fast. Frank drove 90 miles an hour through the desert, top down. Ava drinking Jack Daniels from the bottle. Frank singing every song he knew. They checked into the Desert Inn at 11:30, separate rooms. Frank was still married, but they didn't sleep. They sat by the pool until 4 a.m., drinking, talking about everything, about growing up poor, about wanting more, about loneliness despite fame. They talked until sunrise over the San Jacinto Mountains, and Frank realized he was in love, not infatuated, not attracted, in love, the kind that destroys you. He knew it then, knew she would destroy him. He didn't care. For the first time since Hoboken, Frank felt alive, but Frank was still married, still had 3 children, still had Nancy, who'd sacrificed everything. Nancy knew. Wives always know. Frank came home at 3 a.m., smelling like another woman's perfume. making whispered phone calls, lying about where he'd been. Nancy asked once, "Are you having an affair?" Frank looked her in the eyes. Never. He was lying. But Ava didn't care about Nancy, about vows, or guilt, or consequences. One night in May, Ava pulled away from kissing Frank and said, "Leave her, or never call me again." Frank went home, sat in his driveway for 3 hours, smoked 2 packs, watched his house, his children sleeping, his life. Then he went inside and told Nancy he wanted a divorce. Valentine's Day, 1950. Frank left his family. Nancy begged on her knees. Nancy Jr. clung to his legs screaming. His mother called him a disgrace. Frank packed 2 suitcases, kissed his children, walked out. It was the first of 1,000 times he'd choose Ava. Every time, it cost him everything. November 7th, 1951. Philadelphia. They married. Someone tipped off the press. 50 reporters outside. The judge read the vows. "Do you, Francis Albert Sinatra?" "I do." "Do you, Ava Lavinia Gardner?" Pause. "I guess so." That should have been the warning. The marriage lasted 18 months, that felt like 18 years. They fought like animals. Lake Tahoe, December 1951. Frank looked at a cigarette girl. Ava smashed every mirror in their suite. 7 mirrors, $1,200 in damages. New York, March 1952. Frank put his fist through a wall, broke 2 knuckles, because Ava mentioned Artie Shaw. Palm Springs, July 1952. Neighbors called police 3 times in one night. Each time, Frank tipped them $100. They left, but the making up was as violent as the fighting. Dean Martin stayed once, never again. He said they'd destroy a room, then an hour later you'd hear them in the bedroom. Jesus, they needed the violence to feel anything. It wasn't a marriage, it was an addiction. Then Frank's career collapsed. May 2nd, 1952. The Copacabana. Frank's on stage. "I've got you under my skin." His voice stops, just stops. He walks off stage, doesn't finish. Doctors, vocal hemorrhage, from stress, from screaming at Ava. Complete vocal rest, 2 months. He lasts 3 days before screaming at Ava again. April 1952. Columbia Records drops him. June 1952. His agency drops him. September 1952. His radio show cancelled. By December 1952, Frank can't get work anywhere. He's 37, washed up, and Ava's career is exploding. Magumbo, Oscar nomination, every magazine cover, $100,000 per picture. Frank is now Ava Gardner's husband. People introduce him that way, not Frank Sinatra, just Ava's husband. Dean Martin tells this story. Frank goes to MGM to beg for From Here to Eternity. The Maggio role. "I'll do it for 8,000. Harry Cohn. "We'll think about it." Translation. No. Frank leaves, passes a 10-foot poster of Ava, stands there staring for 5 minutes, calls Ava in Africa, 3 a.m. her time. "Frank, it's 3 in the morning. Ava, I just need. I'll call you back." Click. She never calls back. November 19th, 1953. Frank's apartment. Empty bottles everywhere. He's been calling Ava for 6 hours. She's not answering. Bottle of Seconal on the table. 30 sleeping pills. He takes one, then another, then all of them. Lies down. Finally, it's over. His manager finds him 4 hours later. Unconscious. Blue lips. Ambulance. Stomach pump. He survives. Official story. Exhaustion. Ava flies back from Africa. 18 hours. Sits by his bed for 3 days. And for 3 days, Frank is happy. Then she leaves again. The pattern. Frank breaks. Ava comes back. Frank heals. Ava leaves. October 27th, 1953. Ava files for divorce. Same week, Frank wins the Oscar for From Here to Eternity. His biggest night. Ava's not there. His driver. Frank held that Oscar all the way home, whispering Ava, Ava, Ava. But divorce didn't end anything. Phone records. 847 calls to Ava between 1954 to 1957. Sometimes she answered, sometimes not. But Frank kept calling, kept begging, until November 1957, when he stopped calling and went to her instead. November 10th, 1957. Frank boards a plane to Madrid, hasn't told anyone. Lands November 11th, checks into Hotel Castellana Hilton, room 300, asks the concierge, "Is Ava Gardner here?" Puts $100 on the counter. Room 307, Mr. Sinatra. Ava's been filming in Madrid 3 weeks. She's happy, free, dating a Spanish bullfighter. Frank saw the photos. That's why he came. 8:45 p.m. Frank drinks 2 glasses of Jack Daniels, straightens his tie. He's 42, about to beg. 9:17 p.m. Knocks on 307. Ava opens the door a crack, sees Frank, closes the door. Frank stands there, shocked, knocks again.
Ava, baby, please, I flew 6,000 miles. Nothing. By 10 p.m., the entire floor knows. Manager arrives. Decides to let Frank embarrass himself. 11 p.m. Frank's been knocking 90 minutes. Knuckles bleeding. Slides down. Sits. Starts talking instead of knocking. Ava, I can't live without you. Inside, Ava's crying. Because she loves him, but knows if she opens that door, he'll consume her. 11:47 p.m. Rain starts. Hallway window is open. Frank gets soaked. Doesn't move. 12:30 a.m. The maid. He looked like a homeless man. Whimpering. 1:15 a.m. Remember Palm Springs. Remember the sunrise. Just open the door. Inside, Ava's hand is on the handle. Almost opens it. Then walks away. Turns off her light. 1:52 a.m. Light goes out. Frank knows she's done, but doesn't leave, because leaving means it's over. 2:30 a.m. Still there. 3 a.m. 3:30 a.m. 3:59 a.m. Frank stands. Legs barely work after 6 hours. Puts his palm on the door. Whispers, I'm sorry, baby. 4:02 a.m. November 12th, 1957. Frank walks to room 305. Alone. Soaking. Destroyed. Doesn't sleep. Stares at the wall until sunrise. 8 a.m. Checks out. $500 tip for discretion. Flies home. Never returns to Madrid, but never stops calling. The 1960s. Frank's career roared back. Rat Pack. Vegas. But Dean Martin. Frank was never the same. Laughing on stage. Then backstage he'd shut down. After a sold-out show, Frank destroyed his dressing room. $15,000 damage. Someone mentioned Ava's name. May 1966. Frank 50. Married Mia Farrow. 21. Everyone knew. Trying to erase Ava. Mia later. He called me Ava in his sleep. Marriage 16 months. July 1976. Married Barbara Marks. Lasted until death. But through everything, Frank kept calling Ava. November 12th. Every year. Madrid anniversary. He called. Recording session. Can't remember Mac the Knife lyrics. I can remember every word Ava Gardner said to me, but not this song. Walked out. Journalist asks Ava about Frank. Frank Sinatra was the love of my life, but I couldn't breathe when he loved me. He wanted to own everything, but I never stopped loving him. How fucked up is that? January 25th, 1990. Ava dies in London. Pneumonia. 67. Barbara woke Frank. Told him. Barbara. He walked to the pool house. Closed the door. I heard sobbing for 3 hours. Didn't attend funeral. Too ill, doctors said. Nancy Jr. Dad couldn't face goodbye. As long as he didn't see her buried, she wasn't really gone. 3 days. Frank wouldn't eat or speak. Barbara caught him reaching for the phone twice. To call Ava. Frank recorded duets. Final album. Engineer noticed. Frank brought a photograph into the booth. Young Ava. Madrid. 1957. Asked about it. Frank. She's the only woman who ever made me sing from here. Pointed to heart. Found in his pocket when he died. We remember Frank Sinatra as the man who had it all. But maybe he sang with that ache, because he spent 40 years standing outside a door that never opened. Hotel Castellana Hilton still stands. Room 307 is just another room. But on November 12th every year, staff say you can hear knocking. Maybe pipes, maybe wind, or maybe some ghosts never stop begging. Frank Sinatra died May 14th, 1998. Last words, I'm losing. 82 years old, still losing Ava Gardner. Frank called Ava's number, January 25th, 1990, 3:47 p.m. LA time. She died 3 hours earlier. The phone rang in an empty apartment.